You said you're a professor at the University of Tehran. Now, recently, I believe some universities in Iran offered U.S. students who were expelled from their universities for participating in anti-genocide protests. They offered for them to come to Iran and receive education. Was the University of Tehran one of those universities?
I have not heard the University of Tehran make such an offer, but there are a lot of very good universities in Iran that have made that offer.
Do you know if
And
they've gotten any bites from students?
I don't know, and I doubt that so far they're taking it seriously because I would imagine that many of those students in the United States, if you ask them what Iran is like, they probably they're probably influenced by these very negative stereotypes.
For sure.
Although I think that as people are increasingly becoming skeptical of the Western media, the mainstream media, corporate media, state media, that it's going to be more difficult for them to maintain this narrative uh, in the West. But I think it's still for for a while. I think people will continue to be very skeptical about countries like Iran. I've had every time we've invited professors to Iran, or whenever we've had students come to Iran to study, they are universally very surprised when they come to Iran. They expect something pretty bad, and usually their friends and relatives and family advise them not to come. I remember one case, in fact, when a professor who I knew pretty well, when he came, he had a very heavy bag at the airport, um, and then when I asked what's in this, he said canned. He was sort of embarrassed because in the airport there were shops, and he's saying, I bought a lot of canned food because I thought maybe there would be a shortage of food or something.
Oh no.
So 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 I mean the only thing that's really dangerous in Iran is crossing the streets. If street, uh,
Yeah, the
but
same in
other
Nicaragua, actually.
But other than that, Iran, for let's say a woman walks down a main street in Tehran at midnight, it would be
Hmm,
far more safe than any Western capital that or major Western city that I've been to or I know of.
for sure. Yeah. 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 You couldn't do that in, say, Washington, D.C. That's for sure.
No, I wouldn't do that.
I wouldn't do that as a man.
Yeah.
um, so that's all very interesting. Now you were a volunteer in the
Oh, I should add, sorry.
sure, go
Also,
for it.
a part of the ideology, I mean, the revolutionary ideology was, of course, anti-imperialism, anti
Hmm.
uh, uh, um, colonialism. So, for example, from the very beginning, two key foreign policy issues were supporting Palestine, but also supporting the resistance in South Africa. And so Iran
Yeah,
broke ties with South Africa immediately and with the Israeli regime. And immediately Iran began to support the PLO at that time, which was the dominant group. And in South Africa, it supported the ANC as well as the militant wing, the military wing of the ANC. Both were terrorist organizations according to US law.
as was
And
Nelson Mandela up until
as
the
was
Obama
Nelson
years. Yeah.
uh, well, actually, until 2012. So,
Hmm.
Nelson Mandela, when he was president, he continued to be a terrorist according to U.S. law. And well after his retirement, he continued to be a terrorist. I think he was finally removed in 2012 or 9. I'm not quite
Yeah,
sure,
it
but
was during the Obama years. It was
yeah.
around that time.
So
Yeah.
he had retired from politics when
Right.
he was removed from the ANC. So it was anti-imperialist and it supported Nicaragua. It supported Cuba. during very tough times. It continues to support these countries as well as Venezuela
I've
during the.
seen that. It's been quite impressive. At one point, I think there was a lot of talk in the U.S. media about Iranian vessels going to Venezuela and violating sanctions, and everyone was up in arms about that.
I
Nothing ended
think
up
there's a lot
happening.
more that Iran also did with regards to refineries and with regards
Sure.
to
Yeah,
electrical power
absolutely.
plants and all that. So the Americans tried to bring down the economy, and the Iranians did their best. And General Soleimani was a part of that, by the way. He helped organize all this. So Iran supported these revolutionary movements across the world, but I would say that Iran also, in some respects, it's more conservative because it has it stresses on family and family values. But on the other hand, with regards to social issues, it's stronger, it's more social justice. So in some respects, it has similarities with the left, the traditional left, not because there's no left and right anymore, I think.
Of course.
It's all chaos, but in some respects more to the right. But for example, Iran's abortion laws, which I don't know much about, so it'd be best not to go into any details. But I would say that Iranian abortion laws are neither like what the liberals demand or what the conservatives in the United States. So, for example, if a woman's life is in danger, or if the fetus has a serious problem, abortion will take place. But and there's also there are other issues. I don't want to go into it because I may say something that's wrong. But in any
Sure,
case,
but in
Iran
Nicaragua, it's
is unique. Iran is unique. It's not to the left. It's not to the right. There's certain characteristics in Iran
mm,
that you know would be more similar to what you have in Nicaragua, and then there are other characteristics which would be more similar to what you have in maybe more conservative countries.
sure, yeah, and I think the left in the West maybe ignores Nicaragua for a lot of the same reasons that they ignore Iran, and that is because it has those sort of traditional family values that aren't extremely woke, but are still progressive in their own ways. Um, so yeah, you mentioned the Iranian support for Palestine through the PLO going back to the start of the Iranian Revolution. Now, the struggle for a free Palestine has evolved significantly since then, especially since October 7th. So nowadays, I imagine there is intelligence and resources being shared among the resistance. But Iran has, you know, of course, been a steadfast supporter of Palestine. But where do you see Iran drawing the line? Um, is it Rafah? Is it a full invasion of Rafah, or is it the military occupation of Gaza, or is it sort of a sort of wait and see kind of situation?
Well, I don't know precisely what will happen under what circumstances.
Sure,
But I think it's quite clear to everyone that this axis of resistance, as it is called, or this resistance front, it is a coalition of groups and countries that are supporting the Palestinian people. So, for example, the government of Yemen, which is led by Ansarullah, or what the West often calls the Houthis, they are supporting the Palestinians by a blockade in the Red Sea. They're blocking ships going to Israeli ports or leaving Israeli ports. So the Israeli regime can't use the Red Sea. And of course, after the Americans and the British tried to help the Israelis and they attacked Yemen and killed Yemeni citizens, the Yemeni armed forces, or Ansarullah, they imposed a blockade on American and British ships as well. So they are doing their part. They're causing serious damage to the Israeli economy and to those economies that of governments that attacked Yemen. Hezbollah is carrying out a military campaign in the north. They are striking the Israelis hard. They've caused enormous damage to their facilities, and they've
They're
killed large.
actively decolonizing the North, aren't they? The last
Absolutely.
number I heard was 200,000 settlers have now left the North because of Hezbollah. And I think a lot of people underestimate how significant that is in terms of a active and material, a tangible decolonization of Israel happening as we speak. And it seems like the Israeli media wants to ignore it, and the military is underreporting many interesting facts about what's going on there.
Yes, and they're also underreporting their casualties because there is footage of um, soldiers being hit very hard, and in many cases it's impossible or very difficult to imagine them surviving. But the Israeli regime would not announce any casualties or deaths. So they are underreporting their casualties. They're underreporting the number of people colonizers who've left the north, and we have to keep in mind that Israel has a population of 7.2 million Zionist Jews. Well, not all Jews in Palestine are Zionists. There's a small segment that are opposed to
In
Zionism.
the neighborhood of Mea Sherem in Jerusalem, I believe there's a
But also
uh,
there are others as well. I mean, it's there are, some of the anti-war or human rights activists. But overwhelmingly they are Zionists. So the Zionists are not really very large in number. So 200,000 uh, Israelis or Zionists who are forced to leave the north are a huge burden. So in the north, you have Hezbollah, but also you have Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the north, which do carry out operations against the regime with the support of Hezbollah. And so just yesterday, I think, one member of Hamas was murdered by the Israelis as he was, I think, either going to Syria or returning from Syria. And that is another point that is important, the role that Syria plays.
of course.
Syria what has always been a key country in supporting the resistance. All of the Palestinian groups, and there are quite a few. The strongest group, of course, is Hamas, and then it's Islamic Jihad. But there are a
Sure.
lot of different groups, secular, religious, and they all work together. The Syrians have always supported them. But during the dirty war against Syria, um, Syria became weakened, and the reason why the dirty war was carried out against Syria was because of its support for Palestine. That is the reason. And unfortunately, right now, a part of the country is occupied by Turkey, a part of it's occupied by the Americans, and of course, a part of it's occupied by the Israeli regime. So Syria is under very difficult circumstances, but it continues to help the resistance, and that is why Iranians have been attacked in Syria. It's not without reason that Iranian commanders are killed by or murdered by the Israeli regime in Syria, and there are no attacks, for example, on Iranian embassies in Kuwait or Qatar or anywhere else. It's because of the role that Syria plays, and the fact that this Hamas commander was murdered by the regime, or was martyred by the regime, I think yesterday, shows that Hamas is working and cooperating with Syria. So the role of Syria is very important. They're facing, they have heavy sanctions imposed on them, so they're not in the sort of position that they were. But let us imagine that if Turkey and Jordan did not cooperate with the Americans and NATO and the oil-rich dictatorships in the Persian Gulf to destroy so much of Syria, imagine how much stronger Syria would be today and how much
Absolutely.
effective they would have been in this ongoing struggle against the Israeli regime. So what Turkey did was not only did it help the United States destroy and the Israelis destroy so much of Syria, but they are, as we speak, preventing Syria from playing a bigger role. Even these terrorists that right now Turkey is supporting in Idlib, right now they're not calling, they've never called for a ceasefire so that the Syrian government could focus on Israel. They continue to attack the Syrians, the Syrian government forces. So the Syrians are under pressure from the Americans on the one hand, these terrorists on the other, and the Israelis as well. So
Yeah, I often think if Syria was as strong as it once was and Gaddafi was still with us, that perhaps we would not be seeing what we're seeing today unfold in Gaza.